Well, welcome AMA Wichita. I'm Michelle Eastman, president of AMA Wichita, and we are so glad that you're here. This is our first virtual event, and so we're trying some new things. It's great to see so many faces. So if you want to turn on your video, you can, and see a few folks. We will be muting everyone until the very end, just to get rid of the background noise. But we would love to see you if you want to show your face. How are you? This is a challenging time, that's for sure. Do you have some new coworkers? Maybe some with pause, maybe some who drool, maybe some that keep you up at night. Maybe you're at home and you haven't seen anyone live in a while except for through technology. This is a whole new experience for all of us. Working from home has its own challenges, as well as going into the office where things are, I'm sure, very, very different from what they were. Maybe you're looking for a job in this time of social distancing. So we see you. We know you're doing great things. We want you to know you're not in this alone, that we're here for you, and you make a difference. I want to thank all of our board members for AMA Wichita for coming together during this time as volunteers to make this possible. I want to call out Daniel Drewer, Amanda Mayer, Paige Hewitt, Emily Youngke, Kelly DeCethero for the extra work in trying something new today and making this happen. So thanks so much to our board members. Today we have Kat Poland. She's here to talk to us about storytelling. And I'm sure over these last few weeks, you have some stories to tell. I know that I do. Maybe even you have stories from this morning. I heard from one of our board members that her coworkers, her kids played some pranks on her this morning at breakfast. So, you know, anything can happen these days. But Kat is a freelance writer and communication strategist. She owns Testify Storytelling Services. She's worked with and written for nearly every industry. She's also pursuing her lifelong dream of being a children's book author. And she's recently signed with Raven Quill Literary Agency. Congratulations, Kat, on that. That's exciting. She lives in Hutchinson with her family, and she is currently babysitting 3 young children for teachers until school is back in session. She's got a relevant word for us today. I know that you'll enjoy her candor and her insights. Her presentation is recorded, but she's going to join us afterwards for live Q&A. And we want to hear from you with your questions. So we have a couple ways that you can do that. You can use Twitter, use @AMA Wichita, and then list your question. Or you can use the chat here on Zoom for your questions. Everyone who submits a question will be in drawn for a special AMA branded item. So go ahead and give us your questions, and then stay tuned afterwards so that Kat can answer your questions and be a part of that. So we'll turn it over to Kat in the presentation.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Science and Simplicity of Storytelling. I'm Kat Poland of Testify Storytelling Services, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here, even though I know as non-essential workers you have plenty of time on your hands. Don't lie. Okay. I know you don't have any time on your hands, so I really do appreciate your time being here today. Wish we could have done this in person, but I appreciate your flexibility And I appreciate the Wichita American Marketing Association making this possible to do this online. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that these are difficult times. These are strange times, unprecedented times, and none of us are doing it right. We're all doing things in our business and our personal life. We're doing things how we wouldn't normally do them, and that's okay. And I just want to say that throughout the course of this webinar, if you have any questions, I will be doing a live Q&A at the end. And also just know that not all of this is going to apply to you, and that's okay. So take what works for you, explore what might work for you, and just leave the rest. Now, considering that we're all in the marketing field, I'm gathering that most of you are comfortable with communicating. But maybe you don't feel like you're necessarily a storyteller. And I'd like to talk a little bit about my personal approach to storytelling. I obviously do this for a living, tell stories, but I enjoy it too. I approach each project a bit like the show Chopped. I get my basket of parts and pieces and open it up and see what's inside. And I love the thrill of having to create something from what's there. Maybe that appeals to you, maybe it terrifies you, but I hope today I can show you that no matter what's in your basket, if you have built up your pantry of parts and pieces, that you can create a compelling and interesting story that works for you too. And for those of you unfamiliar with Chopped, I thought I would just give you a little sample of what I'm talking about.
Chefs, there are 3 rounds: appetizer, entree, and dessert. Each course comes with its own basket of mystery ingredients. You must use every ingredient, be it a little or a lot. Also available to you are pantry and fridge. The judging criteria: presentation, taste, and creativity. If your dish doesn't cut it, you will be chopped. Please open your baskets. And for the appetizer course, we have chicken intestines, red miso, Savoy cabbage, and clementines.
I'll bet the other contestants are tripping out over this chicken intestine, but I'm Filipino, that's an everyday food for me.
There are only 20 minutes on the clock. Time starts now.
Chicken intestine, first thing I can think of is really long, slimy rubber bands. I see.
Okay, so some of you might be freaking out over chicken intestines that you've been given to make a story with. But hopefully after today, you'll feel a little bit more confident in your storytelling abilities. Ta-da! Thank you to the wonders of technology. I now have the correct backdrop behind me. What I'd like to talk about next are some of the challenges or obstacles you may be facing when it comes to powerful storytelling for your business. There are really 4 main challenges when it comes to storytelling that you may be facing. And we're just going to go ahead and take some notes here. Challenges to storytelling. The first one I hear the most is time. That you don't feel like you have enough time to really dive into storytelling. You're putting out fires or you're developing other concepts and campaigns, and storytelling just doesn't seem like something you have time for. The next challenge is money. And you may wonder, well, it doesn't cost any money to tell stories. Well, it could, and actually I should say it should. It is something worth investing in, and that may be the personnel, maybe you may have to hire that out, or you may need to look at which platforms you'll be distributing your story on and whether or not those will cost money. The third challenge is lack of ideas. I have to say that as someone who tells stories for a living, full-time, that That is my biggest challenge, and it's not that I don't have ideas for stories, it's that I struggle to extract those story ideas from organizations, but I'll get back to that later. The fourth concern is return on investment. With storytelling, it's sometimes hard to see an immediate return on investment. It's often impossible to see that. And it's sometimes hard to convince stakeholders that storytelling is worth investing in. But I'd like to dive into that fourth challenge to help show you why storytelling is an important investment. It's important to understand the science behind storytelling. Storytelling feels like something we understand because we grew up learning through stories and hearing stories, and most of us can tell a story fairly easily if we're not too concerned about the outcome. But once you understand the science of storytelling and what's actually happening in the brain, it's pretty easy to understand why it's such an important investment for your business. I was recently sent an article from NPR by a friend of mine who's director of communications for a hospital. And as you can imagine, during this time, that's such an important position to be in charge of communicating to the public and the community and to staff members about policy and procedure changes, trying to reassure everyone, keep everyone safe. And she sent me an article from NPR talking about how storytelling actually connects with parts of our brain that helps us to see ourselves in the storyteller and to actually start thinking like they do and moving like they do. And it's almost a dance. One partner moves and the other responds. And I can tell you that I am not a good dance partner, but I do understand how storytelling can cause us to react with information in a way that we wouldn't normally otherwise. When one person tells a story, the other person's brainwave patterns are actually mirroring those of the storyteller, which increases comprehension and also increases the likelihood that the listener will take the desired action of the storyteller, or at least consider taking the desired action of the storyteller. If we look at that a little bit closer, another interesting item from this article is talking about how storytelling can shift our core beliefs. We come back out of the story into the world, into our regular life. And what do we do with that information from that story? How is it impacting how we go about our everyday lives? I think that's especially important during this time when a lot of us are taking actions that we can't imagine having taken just a month ago, just 2 months ago. Let's dive in a little bit deeper into what's happening with the brain through storytelling. I am not a neuroscientist. I can't pretend to completely understand all of this, but I'm very fascinated by it. One of the podcasts I listen to regularly is Hidden Brain, NPR. If you geek out on this kind of stuff, on storytelling, on communication, I definitely recommend you check that out. I also love Throughline from NPR, which takes a look back through history and helps you understand it through storytelling in a way that you maybe have never understood certain situations before. I'm going to link to those podcasts and to the article I mentioned before and to all of those resources I mentioned in the notes of this webinar as well. So let's take a look at what's actually happening in the brain when you are listening to a compelling story. Dr. Paul Zak is another storytelling expert that I've studied quite a bit. And really all storytelling is transmitting important information from one individual community to the next. That kind of touches on the simplicity of storytelling, but right now I'd like to dive into the science just a bit more. Let's hear about allowing for trust and empathy to be built. That's certainly true, and I would like to come back to that later and talk about the ethics of storytelling and why that's so important. So here we're going to talk a little bit more about those neurochemicals that are released in the brain. And as you know, through storytelling, you've got some type of explanation, explaining where the story is taking place, who is participating in the story. You've got some kind of action going on, climax of the story, following action. And stories can take a different pattern, but that's the basic structure of the story. So what happens when you tell a captivating or compelling story? Chemicals, cortisol, dopamine, and oxytocin are released in the brain. Some of these chemical names you're probably familiar with and are associated with feel-good hormones or drug use, of all things. So we look at cortisol, where they call that the stress hormone or the action hormone. And things like conflict can cause listeners to pay more attention. That attention can lead to a deeper connection with the storyteller. And that connection can lead to empathy, which is ultimately our goal, is to get others to really try to put themselves in your shoes to help understand your story. I'd like to talk about empathy specifically. It creates a safe feeling in humans, which allows trust to be built between storyteller and listener. And again, it's important to understand the powerful science behind storytelling, so we also understand how to be ethical storytellers. So now that we understand a little bit more about the science of storytelling, I'd like to explore the ethics of storytelling and why it's so important to remember how much power you are wielding as an effective storyteller. One thing that came to mind for me is looking at another time in our lives, in our history as Americans, when storytelling played an important role in our society. I really would like to look at propaganda that was created around the time of World War II. Now, we typically hear the word propaganda and we immediately dismiss it as something bad. But I'd like to take another look at propaganda and how it can be very powerful for good ways, but we must use storytelling wisely. So let's take a look at this poster, for example. It could have simply just said, you should be car sharing, or had some kind of catchy little tagline about car sharing and the importance of car sharing. But instead of just a simple statistic about the importance of car sharing or a simple straightforward message about car sharing, actually what they did was told a story here. They showed the conflict that could happen and basically saying that if you are driving alone, you are wasting resources. And by wasting resources, we might as well just hand this country over to Hitler. So as you can see, they're doing a lot within one image, within one message, to tell a story and to really connect with people and influence their action after they come into contact with this poster, which is really a story. I'd also like to look at another example of propaganda from the time of World War II and talking about our food supply, which is actually something we can really relate to right now with trying to find things that we need at the grocery store and what happens when factories are being shut down because employees are sickened with the virus. A similar thing happened during World War II with food rationing. And this poster here tells a story of a well-dressed housewife. You know, she's got her apron on, she's got her hair curled and pinned back, she's got some makeup on, definitely probably your ideal housewife from the 1940s. And the story that the poster tells is one of authenticity, because you can see that look in her eyes that she's a little bit overwhelmed by it all. But yet the message says that, yes, we can do this. Of course I can. I'm patriotic as can be, and ration points won't worry me. So it's telling you the whole story here about this housewife and how she's part of this war effort too, and how she's working as hard as she can to provide for her family. Instead of just a simple, straightforward message, plant a garden, can your vegetables. This poster tells an entire story around this challenge that we can overcome as Americans. So if we look at how storytelling ethics applies to modern day and how it might apply to your business, I would say first and foremost, we must always tell stories that are true. And you might say, well, what if we're telling a fictional story about our business? Can we still do that? I would say yes, but the promises and the challenges and the situations that you're telling within the story have to be plausible to your business. My storytelling centers on non-fictional stories, so client testimonials, things that have actually happened, which makes the ethics question easier because you're not going to make up things that just didn't happen. But I do think it's important to frame information in a way that's accurate as well. So you can take 3 pieces of information that are completely true on their own, and you can weave them together in such a way that make them no longer true or perhaps make them misleading. And that is something that we've unfortunately seen with nearly any political situation, and especially right now during these unprecedented and challenging times dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. We've seen stories contain bits and pieces of factual information interwoven with perhaps misleading or false narratives. And I think one thing we've seen people gravitate towards lately is just straight facts and statistics. And one example, one website is the Worldometer website, where it shows just a simple chart and numbers of people in the world who've been affected by the virus and those who died from the virus. I've seen people gravitate towards this type of information, and I think it happens for several reasons. I think one is that people are feeling overwhelmed with emotion from stories that they're currently consuming about the virus. And so when they look at just raw facts and data and statistics, they feel like it's a way for them to keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening without getting swept up and carried away with emotion. That's certainly not the case for everybody, but I think that people also are acknowledging a point to where it's no longer good for their mental health to be consuming stories about the virus nonstop. And again, that right there points to how powerful stories are, because they do have the potential to emotionally flood us, and we have to acknowledge when we need to take a step back. I also think there are those who don't want to acknowledge that having feelings or emotions stirred up might lead them to take action that they might disagree with. So, for example, if you have somebody who may not agree with some of the current policies that are put in place, they don't want to hear the stories, read the stories about victims of coronavirus, because they don't want their actions to be manipulated by stories. So I think it's another reason why we're seeing people gravitate towards numbers and statistics. And again, numbers and statistics can really only be manipulated once you have some kind of narrative behind how they're delivered. So now that we've talked about some of the challenges of storytelling and the science of storytelling, and some of the complicated and tricky ethics of storytelling, I'd like to take it back down a notch and talk about just the simplicity of storytelling and give you some really useful information, some practical steps you can take within your organization and in your own business to improve your skills as a storyteller. And to also, first I'd like to start out with a little story of my own. I had to go to the pharmacy today. I've been practicing social distancing or self-isolating, self-quarantining, whatever you want to call it, for about a month now. And I had to get out of the house today and go pick up some prescriptions at the pharmacy. So I had my Purell wipes beside me, ready to disinfect everything. And there was a line of about 4 cars ahead of me to go through the pharmacy drive-through window. And I noticed that there was a second lane open, the one where you don't talk face-to-face with anybody, where the stuff just comes in through the chute. And nobody was in that line, and I didn't know why. And I could see a piece of paper stuck to the console, but I couldn't read what it said. So I waited in the line with everybody else, and then I decided to see for myself what that second lane actually said. So I pulled up, and all it said, there was a note on the phone that said to please use the speaker, that the phone wasn't operating. But I'm sure they just didn't want people holding the phone up to their mouths and getting their germs all over it. So instead of waiting in a line behind 4 other people for a prescription, I just went to the second line and conducted my business there, and I went really quickly. The purpose of that story is to show you that sometimes we may approach a situation already thinking it's going to be hard. We're already stressed out about it. I was already stressed out about needing to disinfect everything, whether or not the pharmacist microparticles were going to come somehow through the drawer when they open it. I'm really overly anxious about things, let me tell you. But in reality, it really wasn't that difficult. So I'd like to encourage you, as you approach storytelling within your business or organization, just take a deep breath and realize that it might not be as complicated as you're making it out to be. Let's talk first about building a culture of storytelling. And earlier we talked about the show Chopped and how you may be given a set of parts and pieces within your business or organization to tell a story. But if you have successfully built up that pantry and that refrigerator with a good variety of quality parts and pieces for your storytelling, your content toolkit, so to speak, then you'll have a much easier job of putting together your stories when that basket of parts comes. So building a culture of storytelling means that everyone within your organization understands the value and importance of storytelling. They don't have to completely understand it or completely buy into it, but that they at least are willing to cooperate and participate in the storytelling and story sharing. Because I can tell you, it cannot simply be an effort of the marketing communications department. And by department, that sometimes means one person, as many of you know. And if you are the only one within your organization who is committed to story sharing and storytelling, then it is an exercise in futility, as I'm sure many of you already know. So let's look at some relatively simple ways to build your culture of storytelling. One way is through relationships. Building relationships and improving on relationships is a way to be an effective storyteller, and it's also a way to improve the storytelling culture within your organization. So you can't simply carve out a time slot during the all-staff meeting and demand everyone to submit 3 story ideas to you. You can certainly try, but I can almost guarantee you it won't be successful. You really have to lay that groundwork of communicating why storytelling is important, and also increasing people's confidence in their own ability to determine what makes a good story, and also increasing their self-worth in their role in the organization and how important they are and to value and honor and recognize the relationships that they have with your clients and stakeholders. Because if the people around you, the people on your team, don't feel that you value what they do for a living, they won't be very likely to share their stories with you. So after you've built those relationships within your organization and within your management team, the next step to improving your storytelling culture is to actually create responsibilities for everyone to share in storytelling. For example, I serve on the board of a nonprofit that serves people with disabilities and helps them lead more independent lives. And we recently talked about the importance of staff members sharing their success stories. And at some point I realized they were never going to do that if it wasn't part of their responsibilities. And what I mean by that, it wasn't on their monthly goals. It isn't anything that they were going to be held accountable to. It was just a suggestion. It was kind of an extra thing that they had to do. Or actually, I take that back. It was an extra thing they didn't even have to do. So why would they? They're already busy enough. They're stretched thin. They're maxed out. And now you want to throw on an extra thing that I can do that may or may not pay off, that doesn't really have anything to do with my job. So if you can actually find a way to work storytelling and story sharing into their day-to-day job description, I highly encourage you to do that. So what we came up with for this small nonprofit was really a really simple way to ensure that there's some kind of accountability and some kind of responsibility on the part of the team members. So every month they have to check in with their supervisor, and they all have these goals or objectives that they're to have met. And so we created a really simple, just one more little checkbox in there. We didn't want to overwhelm anybody. And all they had to do is show that at some point during the month, they submitted a success story to the communications team, which in the instance of this small nonprofit, it wasn't really a team. It was a staff member who took on social media management on top of her day-to-day duties. So they had to show that at some point they sent an email saying, here's a place that I went and here's the success that I had. And we kept it really basic, really simple. We didn't want to overwhelm people, but it was really well received by staff members that we respected their time, but we were also valuing their input. So the third R in improving your storytelling culture is reward. I always like to try to find ways to reward people for sharing stories. And by sharing stories, that could be anything from they actually sit down and share a story with you, or they tag you in a post on Facebook, or they email you something interesting. Always make sure you reward that individual, whether it's through buying them a cup of coffee or submitting their name into some kind of drawing every month where people who've shared ideas are rewarded with a gift basket or gift certificate. But it doesn't even have to be anything that elaborate. I think even a simple thank you and acknowledgement can go a long way, especially if you copy their supervisor on the email saying, hey, they sent me this great story idea and we were able to use it as a really compelling Facebook post. I just want to let you know that I appreciate what they did. So again, to reiterate, building a culture of storytelling or improving your storytelling culture in your organization, we've got relationships, responsibility, and reward. So once you've improved your culture of storytelling and you've gotten a lot of people involved and committed to sharing story ideas with you, how do you know which story ideas are worth pursuing? I'll share a little bit about my personal process with you, and that is just to simply create some type of tool or resource that works for you. I know that's not a great straightforward answer, but we all process information in our own unique ways. So for example, when I'm working with a big storytelling project with lots of parts and pieces, lots of people to interview, lots of ideas, I start with a spreadsheet, which I'll be the first to admit, spreadsheets are not my forte. I'm not skilled at all the tips and tricks and ways to use a spreadsheet, but I know how to use a basic spreadsheet. So I keep a list of who the story contact is, the story gem or nugget, and the deadline of when their story might need to be pursued or followed up with. And I keep that as just my check-in to see, okay, what story ideas do I have? Now, when it comes to a deeper dive, I'll create a separate document per story idea. And in that document, I will just dump any interesting tidbits or information, facts about that person, things that were going on in history, just any and everything I find related to that story possibility, I will put within that document. In terms of finding those hidden gems, that's really a matter of what works for your organization. What's interesting to your organization? How does it tie back into your business? If it's something that makes you pause and go, huh, that's interesting, then that's probably worth pursuing. If it generates within you any kind of strong emotion, even if that emotion is anger, then that could be a story worth pursuing. I think we are trained to be scared of our emotions, or at the very least, we have learned to set our emotions aside when it comes to especially business communications. And remember, first and foremost, those basic tenets of storytelling, which are that you have to have some kind of a conflict. And you can't really have a conflict without some kind of an emotion. So definitely look for story ideas that generate strong emotion within you or within the people on your team. So you've built up your storytelling culture. You've come up with some type of a system that works for you, gathering story ideas, organizing those story ideas, building around those story ideas. And now it's time to hold all of the stories up to the lens of your objective for your business. I'm fairly convinced that nearly any story there is to be told can somehow work for your business. It just depends on how you frame it. And you'll need to keep your objectives in mind. So are you trying to increase donations? Are you trying to recruit more volunteers? Are you trying to increase sales? You've got to keep those objectives in mind as you are working through your story resources and determining which ones to pursue, and also how to make those the most effective stories possible. One great thing about storytelling too is that it evolves, it changes, it pivots really easily. So when you have a storytelling campaign and something changes within your business or organization, or even in our society and our culture, it's not as difficult to take the stories that you were already telling and bridge them to the stories that now need to be told. For example, last year and early this year, I wrapped up a pretty big storytelling project for Reno County. And they are a health coalition under the Hutchinson Community Foundation. And they were working with Pathways to a Healthy Kansas grantees. And we were telling the stories of the many different changes that organizations made within Reno County to improve citizen and student and employee health and wellness. And it was all great. These stories were all important. And we wrapped up that storytelling project with the intention of telling more stories after phase 2 of the funding. Well, then, as you all know, things change within our society, within our world. And before we could really publish all of those stories, now we're in the middle of a pandemic. And what do we do next? And instead of just letting those stories sit on the shelf, what we are doing is using these stories of what happened not too long ago in our past to show people how we've addressed challenges in the past and what changes were made to now create a healthier community going forward. So we're sharing those stories and also letting people know that we're going to be gathering news stories from these businesses and organizations and finding out how the changes they made through this grant program have enabled them to make better choices now during this pandemic. So as you can see, because it was a storytelling campaign, we can pretty easily take those stories that we've already told, repurpose them for the stories that we are going to be telling here soon. And that way you don't have any wasted content. It's still very powerful. And it's a great example of the flexibility of storytelling and not just the power and importance of storytelling. That wraps up my presentation for today. I really appreciate your time. I hope you found this information useful. And now I'm here for you if you have any questions.
We have Kat here live now to answer some Q&A. I am Paige Hewitt. I am the Director of Social Media for AMA Wichita. And we have had some questions rolling in throughout this presentation. So thank you again for those nuggets of advice, Kat. Really appreciate you kind of peeling back the layers of the science of storytelling and, kind of diving into how to build that culture of storytelling, invoking emotion, authenticity, and, really holding each other accountable and kind of diving through the clutter to create a really compelling story. So with that, Kat, are you there?
Yes,
can you hear us? Perfect. Okay, so we've got some questions that have been submitted. So it looks like Emily had a question. What do you see as the difference between storytelling and journalistic writing? When is it appropriate to use one style versus the other, or are they the same?
That is a really good question. And it's one I've thought about quite a bit. And I know with journalism, there are certain set of standards or ethics that journalists hold themselves to. And I would say that storytelling and the style of journalistic writing, those two can sometimes be one and the same, but I would look at the objective is going to be different. So if you're writing true journalism, the point is to be as objective as possible, to show all sides of the story, to be fair in your reporting. But what I would consider commercial storytelling, which is writing for business, that you have to be necessarily subjective to your business or organization. But like I said before, you're not going to be making stuff up or being misleading. But in the end, your business, your organization, your client, whoever is featured in the story, they are the hero at the end of the story. So I would say that's the difference. And certainly the styles might be similar, but I guess you'd look beyond that to see what is the objective or what are we trying to accomplish. And I've seen as journalists, unfortunately with the way that industry, with some of the challenges they faced, and then bridging into more commercial storytelling, that can sometimes be a challenge to then have to make sure you're driving the end of the story towards being more subjectively positive towards that business or organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just starting with really kind of the objective and letting that guide, the style and the voice and, truly the tone of, whatever piece you're writing. That's great advice. So Shelley has a question. My struggle is often finding my voice. Which person to tell the story? what advice do you have for someone trying to find their voice and really kind of getting into that rhythm?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I would say personally, it took me years to feel comfortable in knowing what my personal voice as a storyteller was. And so if you're trying to find what your own voice is, really the best advice I can give you is write as often as you can. I think especially write for your own personal pleasure, whether that might be a blog or really super long Facebook post like I often make. But you have to just keep testing waters, seeing what feels right to you, what feels authentic to you. Have a few glasses of wine and then write. Sometimes that helps loosen you up. And I would say too, don't ever feel like you're gonna just nail it on the head. You've found your voice and this is your voice the rest of your life. Because like anything else, your voice is going to change depending on what life circumstances you go through, etc. I would say when you're writing professionally and you've been hired to write a story and you're trying to find which voice to write that story in, I would say you're going to work from, or ideally you would work from your own personal voice, and you're going to have a variance one way or the other. You kind of have a range, almost like a singer. You have a range of voices that you can write in. And I understand we all have to take on jobs that might not be ideal to us at times, but if you find yourself having to reach really far outside of that range to tell that story, then you may want to consider hiring another writer to help you with that. I think too often writers feel like they have to be able to write in every available voice out there, and that's just not realistic. And even if you did, it probably wouldn't be very successful and effective. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I love the idea of, you said that you read a lot and, kind of take that and just write everything out and then cull it down from there to find your voice. On that same note, when you are really trying to, figure out what the voice is going to be for that content specifically, do you have any pieces that you or journals that you read on a regular basis, or where do you find your inspiration to kind of get into that right mindset?
That's another good question. I always start with the objectives of the client and what they're trying to accomplish. I think sometimes people might come into a project thinking they already know what the voice should be, when you need to take a step back and look at the ultimate objective of the campaign. And it might be different. There might even be a campaign for a business or organization that has a different voice, a different tone than the main brand voice, so to speak. So you might have a special event that happens as part of a business or organization that's really fun and over the top, and the voice for that's going to be a little bit different than the main brand voice. So I would say start with your objectives for that particular campaign or that particular story. I do look at competitor voices to an extent, but I try not to stay there very long. I think that can get in your head too much of looking at what else is out there and what yours should or shouldn't be. And I think we have to get to a point to where we trust our gut instincts with it, and what just feels right, what feels natural to the campaign.
Fantastic advice. I really like your perspective on, honing in on what that brand voice is, and, identifying what pieces they have out there, taking a look externally outside of those four walls and seeing what's going on in the competitive space, and then, bringing your own voice to the mix too. I think that really makes for a holistic and authentic story to give back to the client. So thank you for that. And Shelley said that that answered her question as well. So Tanya has a question. What do you think would would qualify as good storytelling to get attention from others so they keep listening to you? What are some tips you have there?
That's another good question. I would say my main advice, if your objective is to get attention, is that you can't play it safe. And that might look different depending on who you're writing for or your objective, but it has to feel a little bit scary, a little bit new, a little bit different than you've ever done before. And you can also look at, I'm trying to think of, okay, so for example, think of your own wardrobe. You've got those staple pieces that you have that you kind of build from, and not everything in your wardrobe is going to be edgy and different and up with the latest fashions, but you've got a few pieces that are definitely for attention. And I think you need to look at your content makeup for your business or organization the same way, that some pieces are going to be kind of more of those stable and informative pieces, whereas other pieces need to be more attention grabbing. And for that, I would just say, if it feels safe, it's probably not effective.
I love that. Thank you for bringing that wardrobe analogy into the mix. I don't know about you, but for me, you know, working from home, I've had to readjust some of my wardrobe pieces. So I might dress professional up top when I'm helping and going to be on video, and then maybe some yoga pants on the bottom. So having a good mix and knowing when to pull on those pieces, I think is definitely a great component to good storytelling. So thank you for bringing that in. Morgan has a question. What ways would you suggest to help establish credibility when using storytelling as a tool?
Another great question. I think this is where testimonials are so important, because when you use actual stories from your clients, I think that instantly lends credibility, because then it's even more apparent that you aren't just pulling things out of thin air and making them up. So I would say use as many testimonials as possible to establish that credibility. And I think beyond that, just doing your due diligence and researching a particular topic, and also considering unique voices as well. So I think there are times when you've maybe had the same voice talking about the same thing for a very long time, and you need to introduce new voices to lend more credibility or more truth to that particular subject.
Absolutely. And would you say, just building on top of that, you know, you said that you have a spreadsheet that kind of details out, you know, ahead of time what stories you're going to be working on. Would you say that maybe planning ahead in that form or fashion will help you understand, you know, okay, this piece you need a little bit more to credentialize yourself a little bit more, so you'll pull in research from here or get other outside voices from, you know, whatever avenue? Is that something that helps you plan for that as well?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I'll admit that it's not always something I'm great at is outlines, but I think you definitely want to, you know, have some kind of checklist of here's the different areas, the different voices we want to hear from. And oftentimes when I'm working with a project manager, if my client has a project manager, they will give me that in advance. And then that's another opportunity to look at it and say, these are great, or have you considered bringing in this person or this different voice?
Wonderful. Well, we could sit here and talk for hours, I'm sure, and just really get into the nuts and bolts of what makes great storytelling. But I will close with one more question, a little bit more fun, and people may not know this about you, but can you tell us a little bit about what your children's book is about?
Oh yeah, no, I'd be happy to. And I do want to clarify that those are my children. I'm not babysitting them for their teachers until school's back in session, but sometimes I like to pretend that because it makes it feel a little bit easier. I have 3 children. They are 10, 8, and 5. And my oldest child, my daughter Anna, is neurodivergent. She's autistic. And I wrote a children's book. It's a rhyming picture book about the experience of special needs siblings. and kind of what they go through in their story, kind of letting them have a place and a voice for them. And it was kind of inspired by my second daughter. But both girls thoroughly approve of the book. And yeah, it's been a fun process to write that and to go through the whole querying process and find an agent. And it's very exciting, and I feel very fortunate.
Wonderful. And what's the name of the book?
Well, that's up in the air right now because as I've learned, once you get an agent and there's editors involved, so the original title of the book, I let my daughter choose the title of the book, and she wanted to call it I'm Special Too. And my agent feels like it's not a strong enough name, and I'm trusting the process. So I don't know what it's going to be called.
Yeah, once you get, all of those opinions in there, I'm sure it can take many shapes. But we definitely look forward to hearing more about it. So keep us updated on when that rolls out, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
So with that, I will pass it off to our president, Michelle Eastman, to give us some closing remarks.
All right. Thank you so much, Paige and Kat. It was great to have that Q&A and end that way today. Thank you so much, Kat, for sharing with us about storytelling, and give us some tips for going forward, because we all have great stories to tell. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're so glad that you did. This was our first virtual event, and we'd love to hear from you. So we will do a survey, and we want you to fill that out. Let us know how we can improve. If things didn't work quite the way you thought, we'd love to hear that too, because chances are we're going to do another virtual event coming up in May. May 21st, we will have our SEO event with Cassandra Bryan. I know that many of you, like I, were really looking forward to that in March, and Cassandra has graciously moved her event to May, and we want you to tune in for that as well. I wanted to talk about the Wichita Marketing Awards are on pause for now. We do hope to have a June 11th event, but we're not really sure what that's going to look like. And so we have paused the awards portion of that because this is the time where we would have reached out to the call for entries. And we know that you're busy enough and that things are strange enough without introducing that. So look forward to that. You should have also received a SurveyMonkey request to vote on board members for the 2021 year. So go ahead and fill that out. We are getting ready for that new year and the transition of that. So help us out by filling that out and voting for those members. There is a membership special if you need to renew, or if you've always thought about becoming an AMA member. We would love for you to take advantage. Memberships are at half price, and I don't know how long that will last, but you'll want to get in on that. Most of all, I just want to encourage you to take care of yourself. These are such challenging times and a different environment than we've ever been in. Take time for you. Take a walk, ride a bike, enjoy the funny things that happen throughout the day and laugh. Reach out to a friend. During this time, you're not alone. None of us are doing things perfectly, but we are learning new things and we're trying new things. And I want to encourage you to keep doing that. We're in this together. You're doing terrific things. And we hope to see you next month for our AMA event. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.